Hi, my name is Carly. I'm the Employer Relations Specialist at McEwen University. Thank you for joining us for Going Global, Finding and Applying to Work Overseas. We're doing a series of interviews with graduates from universities here in Alberta who are currently working abroad. Today we have Mark Butler, who is hanging out with us from Australia. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Thanks for having me.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm originally from Edmonton, Alberta. I did a Bachelor of Commerce at the University of Alberta, and then moved directly into industry. So I started working with KPMG, which is one of the big four international accounting firms straight out of university. And then after about 5 years of working with the firm in Edmonton, I transferred again with the firm to Brisbane, Australia, where I'm working right now as a manager in the advisory risk consulting practice.
Right. And so when you began with KPMG, were you aware of the different programs that they had to transfer to some of their more global offices?
Yeah, I was. So it was part of one of the big recruiting pushes with KPMG is a program that they have called Global Mobility. And it would be the same for any of the big four firms and medium firms. And really, most international companies will have some sort of relocation program. But effectively, all of the international KPMG offices are member firms of the same international company. So it allows you that flexibility to, travel between offices, or if you're interested in doing a short-term secondment, they offer those from a couple of months up to 2 or 3 years. So it's definitely a great program, and that was a big part of my decision to begin working with KPMG was the fact that that did exist.
How did you choose Australia, and how did you kind of research the opportunities there before you made your decision?
Um, Australia was really made on a personal decision. So for myself and my girlfriend, we had always wanted to live and work in Australia, even though we hadn't actually traveled here before we decided to move. So, but also it was a decision around making sure that it was a sensible choice for my career path as well. So obviously, I only speak English, so the language barrier was obviously a big factor for me. So that really sort of took some of the places in Europe and other places in the world out of the equation for me. And then with Australia, it's also a very similar business environment, I suppose, to Western Canada. So it's very heavy in the mining and oil and gas and the resource industry. So I saw that as something that if I wanted to go and have this international experience and then potentially come back to Alberta or Western Canada one day, I wanted it to be something that I would be able to leverage when I came back as well.
Right. That's so exciting, though. How did the company support you in the move or the transfer?
So the Global Mobility Program, while I didn't actually go through that, it's designed to assist with all of the aspects of doing an international relocation or an international secondment. So the company helps with everything from establishing and paying for the visas to paying for relocation costs, helping you find accommodation and somewhere to live when you arrive at wherever it is that you're going. So it's a fully supported program, and that's generally similar for any of those international mobility programs that you'll find in most large companies. In my instance, specifically, what I actually did was I applied for a job with the Australian firm, and then once that was sorted out and I'd accepted a position, I actually quit my job with the Canadian firm. The reason being just around the timing for the international relocation and when we wanted to go didn't really work with the global mobility program at the time, but that was more just of a personal preference when we wanted to go. It's obviously a challenge of when there's positions available at the office that's looking for transfers as well as the office that's making the transfers. So the Australian firm still assisted with all of those parts of my relocation. So my employment contract is actually built around the international relocation, and that includes costs for moving, personal effects. It pays for the flights, pays for the visa, and that's obviously built into the contract itself.
How did it work for your girlfriend to find work? Did she have an easy time of finding and securing employment in Australia?
Yeah, so in our situation with the Australian visas, they're relatively flexible. So the majority of people that come to Australia do so on something that's called a 457 visa, which is a business-sponsored temporary working visa, and it's good for a period of up to 4 years. That visa allows your spouse, either your actual spouse if you're married or by common law or de facto spouse, to work under your visa as well. So my girlfriend and I had lived together in Edmonton, so we were able to demonstrate to the Australian government that we qualified for a de facto spouse relationship. And what that means is that my girlfriend is then sponsored under my visa, which is sponsored by KPMG. So on paper, it works perfectly fine, and it's a great setup. In practicality, it's a little more difficult, and the reason for that is that the Australian economy has taken a bit of a dive in recent years, and it's, Australia is now feeling the results of the global financial slowdown, just like everyone else. It's just slightly delayed. So the challenge in that is obviously that, and I think it's something that most expats or most foreign people working on foreign visas don't anticipate, is that if there's any kind of slowdown in the economy and it causes any issues with unemployment of naturalized citizens, then obviously that's a challenge for people working on foreign visas, and it makes it quite difficult to find work, which is the situation now. So right now, both myself and my girlfriend are working, but it's one of those situations where you have to be a little proactive in understanding what that looks like in the economy and what that looks like in the job market before making that kind of move.
Right, exactly. No, I can imagine. No, that's interesting. Thanks for sharing a little bit more about her experience as well.
Mm.
How was your initial experience when you arrived? Did you have any culture shock at all when you arrived off the plane?
From a business standpoint, the biggest change for me was that there's a very big focus on having and maintaining work-life balance here in Australia, and personally, I think it has to do with the fact that it's gorgeous outside more often than not, so people aren't really eager to spend time in the office, whereas when you have 6 months of winter, that's a bit of a different situation. But that's probably the biggest challenge for me. Is it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but I had to learn how to slow things down a little bit, and it's not really a comment on the quality of the work. It's just that in my experience, I think Canadians are generally very hardworking and willing to put in a lot of time and a lot of overtime in the office, and that's a good thing, and it's a good habit to learn, but you have to learn how to be a little bit more efficient, I suppose, when you are trying to fit into different working cultures and understanding how that works and what that looks like. So that was probably the biggest shift for me. The other part that I found a challenge that you perhaps take for granted and don't really realize is that when you move into a new country, into a new city, into a new business environment, you really don't have an established business network, and you don't really have that established network of people that you grew up and went to university with and perhaps went through your professional training with. It takes a lot of work to embed yourself into that business culture, and that's a lot of work that you need to do on your own time. So in the evenings and the weekends, understanding what the business culture looks like, reading business magazines and financial reviews, even anything down to just understanding local sports culture, so you have something to talk to your clients about or to your coworkers. I come from following the Oilers, and suddenly I'm showing up where there's cricket and rugby, which I knew nothing about. So it was a bit of a challenge and things that you don't really anticipate, but that's all part of the adventure, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And what about resources or particular websites that you might have looked into to kind of connect with the business community? Are there any resources that you would recommend?
There's a few expat-specific forums which are really good. They're really useful for it's Canadians specifically who are living abroad in Australia or in Asia or in the United Arab Emirates, wherever it might be, and they post about their experiences, and you can ask questions about finding somewhere to live or getting your driver's license or setting up a bank account. It's all of the small things that you take for granted, I suppose, in your day-to-day life that you do really have to establish from scratch. So that's I found very useful. And the other piece that I found quite useful was just general government, the website. So the government of Australia has obviously an immigration website, and that's going to be similar for any government. So I spent a lot of time in the immigration website learning about the visas and the different requirements of the visas and the restrictions, because that's obviously important to know. And then as well, the other big thing to consider is just any tax implications. So I'm lucky with Australia in that they have a tax treaty signed with Canada, so there's no risk of double taxation. But that's obviously something that you need to do your homework, and you need to understand that when you're making that decision. Understand how that impacts your Canadian taxes, and also what your tax liability will look like in the new country that you're living in, because it's not generally very straightforward. There is some work that needs to be done there, or some research, I suppose.
That's true. Spoken like a true accountant. I agree. It's very practical information that people don't think of up front. So that's really helpful. What are maybe some other tips or advice that you would share with students or graduates rather looking to work abroad?
I think from my experience, maybe the best piece of advice that I can give is that it's actually not as scary as it probably seems when you're first starting to look into it. So picking up your life and moving it from, for a lot of people, where you've grown up to a new country, new city is a fairly daunting task. But in hindsight now, having been through it, it's very achievable. And in this, we're lucky that we live in a time where you can find out absolutely anything you need to know basically online. So my recommendation would be that, as you're looking for somewhere to go and where you might want to go and live and work abroad for a while, do your research ahead of time. So I would say be realistic with the research, but make sure that you actually put the time into doing that research. Understand what the job market looks like, understand what's going on in the economy, and just try to think about how that will actually impact your personal life. The other recommendation I have is that the best way to get involved, I think, quickly is to find something outside of your work to do once you arrive. So I think it's really important to look at joining a sports team or getting involved in some sort of club. And that might not be something that people do in Edmonton as part of their daily life now, but if you suddenly move abroad and you have no family, no friends, that's probably the best way to help yourself settle into that new situation, because it can be somewhat lonely and uncomfortable for the first few months. So that's, I think, the challenge, is making sure you go out of your comfort zone and really trying to meet people and build that network for yourself and wherever it is that you end up.
That's true, because it's about being sustainable and making sure that you're creating a network for yourself in a new country.
Especially nowadays, the reach of your social network is international as well. So leverage off the friends and the family that and if you're looking for work, just expand that network. LinkedIn is a really useful tool. That's obviously the way that a lot of people find international opportunities or international contacts. So I think that people are a little hesitant to reach out through their social networks, and they shouldn't really be that concerned. That's probably the best way to meet someone that lives in the city that you're moving to, or meet someone that works in a company there that you might have a potential in with. So that's a good tool to use. Absolutely,
LinkedIn for sure. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us so early in your day on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And thanks for watching, everyone that is out there watching. Keep an eye out for more interesting career chats from Career Services. And thanks again, Mark. And take care.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.